Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are on this blue planet. Welcome to another session of Microsoft Zero to Hero. I am Shahab, the guy who happened to be a software engineer. I'm also a community leader and will be your host for today. Today we will have our guest, Sarah Wimberley, and she will talk about the what, who, and why of content management. And we are part of Microsoft community, Microsoft Learn community, in which it is a vibrant global network where learners like you could connect with Microsoft experts. And it is a topic-focused space where you can ask questions, participate in discussions, and interact with experts through both virtual sessions and asynchronous chats. If you want to find more about us, you could follow the two links in below, aks.ms/Microsoft Learn Community and aka.ms/learning rooms. The code of contact is as simple as being friendly and respectful to everyone, and listen to different opinions, and be kind and patient. Then, without further ado, I would like to bring Sarah on a stage with us. Hi.
Hi, everybody.
Thanks for participating.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, so if you're ready, do you want to give an introduction about yourself, or do you have like a slides for the introduction so I could bring?
I do, yes. So we can dive right in.
Okay, great. Then here you are. The stage is yours. I will be on backstage, and good luck.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody, for joining me today to learn more about the what, who, and why of consent management. So through our session today, we're going to talk through and hopefully by the end of this, you'll have a foundational understanding of consent management. You'll understand how organizations can meet internal goals and data governance needs. And we'll talk through how to approach looking for technologies to help you deliver. I'm Sarah Wimberley. Thank you again for joining me today. And I enjoy connecting technology with the human experience by talking about the intersections of delivering value and managing people. I've served as an enterprise architect, a product owner, and a program manager at leading regional and national healthcare institutions. I've led dynamic cross-functional teams through multiple platform and product migrations, improving business processes and driving growth. So what is consent management? May or may not have been a term you've heard before, but consent management, really broadly, 10,000-foot value or level, is the active, holistic, compliant approach that an organization takes to track an individual's agreed upon cookie and communication preferences. So even when you joined StreamYard today, you hopefully saw the pop-up on the bottom right corner where you could acknowledge the website's use cookies. And we were just chatting before we started even that the one thing I already like about StreamYard is the top right corner of that pop-up. You can not allow it and you can keep using StreamYard. So a company is communicating with an individual through a mechanism on the topics they request. That's really what it is. It can be that simple. And then the communication stops when the individual says so. Snail mail, emails, phone calls, and texts are all part of this active and compliant approach. So to add in that holistic component, though, is when we bring in the website cookie tracking. So if you had opted into StreamYard's preferences, like most websites nowadays that have that cookie pop-up, you're acknowledging and accepting the fact that the website is going to follow you around through their website and maybe even other websites that you go to later. The whole point of this is to make your consumer experience better. But they're also going to glean data from your user, from your browser and your behavior. So you can sort of equate this to outside of the internet's use where you're talking about something at home and you might have an Alexa device and then Amazon is serving suggestions for products that are related to the topic that you were just listening to or just talking about. Or you search for something on Google on your mobile device and then you see social media ads that were related to what you were just searching for on your device. Very similar topic, or very similar concept. So companies that need consent management are communicating with their customers, their consumers. They're sending out communications. That's really the easy answer. But the C-suite strategic answer for this is that they're trying to create a meaningful relationship between the individual and their brand, the product, or even a specific service. They're trying to target users with relevant information and advertising. 42% of companies use cookies today, and this was just 11% 10 years ago. So this is absolutely a growing trend that we'll continue to see. It's really important to understand the degrees of data that are that are used in this space. So here on the screen are really just high level kind of examples of the source data and some pros and cons. We'll talk through them a little bit. So zero-party data. So this is something that an organization is collecting directly. This can include preferences and opt-ins, but is usually collected through surveys, pop-up windows, things of that nature. The most important thing to understand or kind of recognize about zero-party data is that they're provided intentionally by the customer, and they can normally be assumed as 100% accurate. First-party data is also data that your organization collects directly, and includes things like authenticated interactions on your app or your website, downloads and purchases through order history, as well as loyalty program data. This is going to include the consumer's addresses, additionally their email address, maybe also some additional opt-in information, and even in healthcare, this can include additional demographic data or even financial data. The data that your organization has collected directly from the individual, but passively. So they place an order, they're sharing their information with you, but not as directly, because you're not necessarily explicitly telling them, unless your organization is. You might not be explicitly telling them upfront that you're going to use their email for marketing, or you're going to use the other data that they have to market them in the future. So this data, this first-party data, is normally high volume if you have a well-oiled machine of a business. The disadvantages of first-party data, though, or the challenges of first-party data, can be identity management. So this is where you have multiple sources of data, and you're trying to bring those together in a way that makes sense, so that you have a singular source or a reconciled pattern of data that connects all of the disparate parts of a person into one singular identity or one singular record of a person. So you're pulling together survey data from zero party. You're pulling in their email address, their opt-ins, their permissions, orders, authenticated interactions, all into one record of that person. That's identity management in a nutshell. Second party data is the same type of first party data that we've already talked about, but is sourced from a corporate partner. So each corporate partner has their own first party data, and they share it through perhaps a partnership or a relationship that they have with each other for cross promotion or co-marketing or what have you. And that original corporate partner's first party data becomes their partner's second party data. So this data can augment existing data that you have, but for some organizations, and depending on your partner, maybe that's less trusted for you and could even conflict existing data that you already have. So depending on your data governance policies and how you approach that, something to think about. Third-party data, I'm sure some of you have heard of the concept already, but this is collected by external third parties. So this is purchase release data from aggregators or platforms. You can think of marketing services for which you can purchase mass lists like Experian or even the Postal Service. That includes data that displays or shares the propensity to do certain things. Propensity to travel, might even augment existing data and provide income or languages spoken at home if they have pets, things like that. It's unfortunately even less trusted than your second party data and could also conflict that existing data. So why does consent management matter? Why is it even necessary? So this is really, at the end of the day, to acknowledge the fact that people have communication preferences. Not everybody wants to be targeted. So the whole intention of consent management is to help individuals get what they do want. And there are qualitative and quantitative reasons behind all of that and behind actively managing consent. So from a qualitative approach, we're going to focus on trust. So underlying that are shared values, reliability, transparency, supporting a frictionless experience, and security. All of this improves and maintains a brand value. And marketing teams can spend most of their budget on brand awareness, and poorly managed consent degrades this. The success of your organization can depend, and usually does, on these relationships. Integrity and respect might even be embedded in your mission, vision, and values. And if you don't actively, holistically, and compliantly manage consent, you run the risk of violating trust, in addition to fines or penalties from the government. So we're going to get started talking through how to look for technologies. So I've broken this into a couple different kind of phases, putting back on my program manager hat here. And we're going to talk through each one of these in a fair amount of detail to kind of get everybody started. So no pun intended. So in getting through kind of in planning, wrapping your head around kind of some high level impacts and requirements and things like that, first, we need to look at what are the rules that definitely do and might apply to you and your organization. So this is going to be based on where your organization resides, in addition to where your customers or donors reside. You're going to take into account where you currently are and where your future growth and expansion might take you. That's going to help balance those short and long-term vendor capabilities and technical debt. Because the last thing you want to do is adopt a technology that boxes your business in more than they do themselves already. So business impacts, that is absolutely a huge thing to dig through and is much more than kind of the bullet point that this represents. But you need to understand the business impacts by centralizing this data. So is this going to help marketing pull lists faster or more reliably? Will they be able to self-service and get your IT teams back to doing more data wrangling or more technology heavy things that the business teams absolutely can't or shouldn't be doing? And then from a business perspective, do you need to account for marketing personas, which is a really common marketing business term if you haven't heard of it, but it's really very common to make sure that the right demographic, the right type of person is in the right type of marketing channel. Another impact that you possibly should consider is if whether or not your call center is going to need to be able to facilitate opt-ins and opt-outs. So what are the business users in your organization that need to be a critical part of this process end to end? Technology impacts, we'll dig into this a little bit more on the next slide. There's quite a few impacts to consider there. From user impacts, this along those same lines of what we already mentioned about call center, consumers themselves make changes. Do they need to be able to log in somewhere or simply manage unsubscribes from the bottom of an email? Consider internally, who can make changes internally? Call center agents, sales agents, support teams, maybe not admins, depending on your audit trail impacts. And then we're also going to need to identify internal timelines and budget. Is there a deadline that you need to meet or beat to stay compliant or fix compliance issues? And is there a budgetary ceiling or for fees that you need to stay within? Definitely take into account that year one might be more expensive based on implementation fees with a vendor, and then any contractor or temporary staff that you might need in terms of project managers or even legal experts. So as far as our technology impacts to consider, there's quite a few, and this is not an exhaustive list. This is just to kind of get your brain thinking and the conversation going here. But you're going to need to consider, where is this data going to be stored? How will it be used? Who's going to use it? What data elements are needed in addition to the consent itself? Timestamps, probably, at the very least. How will the data be moved between systems and people securely? And the last one I have here on the screen right now is, which system is the source of truth when or if there's an issue or inquiry? The last thing you want to be doing is when your CEO or VP contacts you because an issue was escalated from a customer and you can't answer them fast enough. Additional technology impacts to consider: how frequently will the data be synced for downstream systems to use? What about changes in those other systems and syncing back to the source? How are we managing opt-outs? How are we managing duplicates in terms of identity management? What kind of audit trail is required, and how long do we need to retain the data? Some industries like healthcare in the US, we have a 10-year policy. Most organizations abide by that, if not even a little longer, just to be safe. But it's really important to understand and at least start to pick apart these questions. Before you start a project and start thinking about vendors, absolutely don't, from my perspective, in my opinion, don't need to have all these questions answered in a regimented yes, no, this is absolutely what we're going to do way. But these are important questions to start talking about, start understand who you need to bring to the table, which gets us to our partner slide here. So In the next phase of the project, we're going to partner. Really, that's identifying stakeholders, which I have our next slide kind of digs into that a little bit more. We're going to also, in this first or the second partner phase, we're going to confirm if the organization requires vendors to be in the US, the EU, or a particular region. This is a really important requirement to nail down early on. This is going to shorten your vendor list significantly. Of the 30 or so vendors that play in this space, they are located all around the world. And if you need someone to be located in the US or in the UK or EU or wherever, knowing that upfront is going to shorten your vendor list significantly. And then our next thing to dig through and start to think about is what your competitors are doing. How are they engaged in this space? And most importantly, do you even care? And it's okay if you don't care. You're going to do what you need to do for your organization or for your team's sake. But sometimes competitive analysis and understanding what your competitors in your industry are doing can be important to understand. The last and certainly not least is to review technology partners that you already work with to see if they offer appropriate products in this space. Depending on your contracting and onboarding process from a vendor perspective, it could be faster, more likely faster, and maybe even more cost effective for your organization to expand services with an existing vendor than start from scratch. So to absolutely keep that in mind, especially if you're compounding the challenge with fixing compliance issues where there's a hard and fast deadline. So let's come back to stakeholders. And this is really the who's who of, who in a perfect world you would bring to the table in terms of talking about consent and preference management. First and foremost, your privacy and compliance teams. These are the experts on the rules. I'm not a lawyer and I don't play one on TV, and I'm never been on a privacy team myself, but I've worked with enough privacy and compliance experts to know that they are absolutely the right people to be answering some of these more detailed questions about what does and what doesn't apply to a particular organization in terms of these kinds of policies. You also need to bring in your data teams who are going to be moving and transforming the data, whether that's just internally around your organization, but also from the vendor that you want to be bringing in, moving that data between the vendor and a data warehouse to other systems, back and forth, and making sure all that data stays in sync. You also want to engage with the technical and product teams. So people who are managing the systems that are holding this data, whether they're the future product team who's going to be managing the new vendor, or they're managing the systems where the data is going to be landing. So your warehouse team, a CRM team, things of that nature. You also need to engage with your marketing and sales teams to understand how they're going to be using the data. How do they use data today, even if it's not centrally located for your organization? This would also be helpful to start having those conversations on what the personas might look like for the organization. You're also going to, you should also consider bringing in your analytics teams who might be interested in using this data to build reports, whether that's for marketing or leadership, and then acknowledging, but more than likely not bringing into the table your consumers. All right, so we've talked through some impacts. You started hopefully putting together the answers to all these questions in some formal documentation to some degree. Now you interview all the stakeholders that we've talked through. We're going to gather high-level capabilities that are must-haves, which we'll discuss on the next slide as far as capabilities to consider. And then you're going to start your vendor research. So if you do need to search externally for a brand new vendor, see if your organization has a vendor management team that can help support you in this research. If not, there are reputable agencies like Gartner that regularly publish a best of the best guide that can help jumpstart your search, not only for consent management, but for a lot of different verticals in the technology space. If your organization does a formal RFP process, move through that as expeditiously as you can. And then subsequently, that'll help narrow your list to 3 or 5 options to host product demos and have those vendors come in with their experts, where you would bring your stakeholders together along with the vendor to really dig into what the product can do, not do, and allow your stakeholders to ask questions directly of the vendor. So as I alluded to, we have a slide here on capabilities to consider, and we'll talk through each of these in a little bit of detail. So Something that's probably, I think probably existential maybe in the consent management preference are these first two. I think in my research and work in this space, these first two can really make or break a vendor, whether or not they should be seriously considered to be part of your organization's ecosystem. And that's the ability to define and track consent elements, as well as their approach to identity management. So if you are, if you're looking for an external vendor for the first time in this space, and you don't have an identity management system or solution in any other way or shape or form, that can help you, but it can also hurt you because you don't necessarily know what you need or you want. But that also can really let you allow the vendor to guide you along the path to greatness, right, in this space. But the ability to define and track consent elements, especially from an existing system or platform, even if it's disparate systems that are tracking elements, the ability to define them is a big delineator for vendors in this space. Some vendors have a all-in approach where they define them and you're locked in to those 5, 6, 7, 8 consent elements. Other vendors, you define them, and to what degree and grain of the consent data that you want to define them, it's completely up to each individual client of theirs. So understanding from your compliance teams and your business teams what they really need for the organization to be compliant, as well as the business to be successful and what they're doing from a marketing perspective, will really help nail down those first two capabilities. Our third one here is cookie consent management. So this is the website pop-up that we talked about at the top of the session here. If you do this already through a separate vendor, there are a lot of vendors in this space that perform and have a product that do this as well. So something to consider as an opportunity to blend vendor capabilities upon launch or as a roadmap to just consolidate the vendors that an organization might work with. And if you have a call center, something to consider too, especially here in the US, is the TPCA, which is the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, to better understand how the organization can support, how the new vendor can support the organization from a compliance perspective to be understanding of what this policy means on a state-by-state level, but then also be compliant and uphold it. Depending on where your organization wants or needs to go from a scalability perspective is really important. We mentioned at the top to understand where you and your organization and your customers reside today versus future state growth is important to understand from a volume perspective with vendors. If you're charged per record or if it's a flat license, for example, can be a very big dollar sign difference when it comes to a contract. In addition to regulatory needs, a lot of these vendors in this space have their own privacy teams, and they do the due diligence on digging through 50 US state policies, which is no small feat. I'm glad they get to do it and I don't have to. But that can be very overwhelming for an organization that doesn't have that sort of privacy or compliance support. So understanding what resources you can bring to the table as an organization from a regulatory perspective versus what you might need or want from a vendor is very important. Then also that enforcement. So are they going to back you up if there's a challenge or a problem or an issue or an inquiry, and understanding how their kind of support it from that perspective works. Integrations and UX customizations options are definitely more on the marketing front end perspective, but are no less important. Integrations kind of can run the gamut between streamlining the data from a bidirectional perspective and sharing that from the vendor to your cloud or local warehouse or downstream systems and solutions. It can also mean, serving up those opt-in screens that are powered by the vendor, but are, iframed in or API'd into your website, for example, or a portal or an app. Understanding how you have things today that would need to be explicitly replaced in a future state versus nice to haves that you could kind of grow into as you got more comfortable with the vendor, but then also your organization grew is really important. So as we move through the conversation of actually selecting a vendor, I mentioned there's numerous vendors in this space today. So this is a very high level, simplistic approach to if you got it down to 3 here. And really when you're looking for a technology product in any vertical, let alone consent management, you're really trying to find that happy medium between capability, reliability, cost, and business value, ease of use from a business and from a technical perspective, and then scalability. So other factors that I've seen come into play are also company stability or tenure. Are they a startup versus, they have 30 years of experience or somewhere in the middle? And then effectiveness of support staff. The last thing you really want to do is be trying to just get some high level information about a vendor, and it takes them 3 weeks to respond to your email. So that can definitely not only be a deal breaker from RFP perspective, but also just might unfortunately illustrate their responsiveness in other ways. So if this was me making this decision out of just these 3 vendors, we'd probably end up going with company B. Company A is the lowest cost, but doesn't offer enough capabilities. Company C is the most expensive with even less capabilities. And company B is kind of our happy medium. And really, vendor management is all about finding that happy medium, especially with your stakeholders, and understanding those trade-offs to be able to not only get folks on board with the new vendor so that they are willing to commit their time and energy to talking about their requirements, but at the same time, moving forward through what can be a really arduous process to talk through permission and consent management as a whole, even if it's something your organization has well established. So now we're moving into our deliver phase of the project. So we've selected the vendor, and now we are going to actually start delivery and our go live process. So if you've selected a vendor that's brand new to your organization might have a technology review board or third-party risk assessment process, or even enterprise architects that can kind of guide you through this phase to be able to make sure that people, process, and technology remain balanced and the organization is essentially safe. So I am going to take a quick pause here, and we will open it up for some Q&A as kind of a halfway point here before we get into some use case examples.
Okay, thank you. So we have 2 questions. One is a little bit long. I will just read through it. So first of all, they thanked you for the valuable information that you provided. And the question is, what tools would you recommend or suggest? And in the world of artificial intelligence, how can we make the best use of them?
Tools. So I guess I'm not going to endorse any tools. Definitely, every organization has unique requirements. I've used a number of tools, including homegrown ones or tools that were maybe not necessarily designed for consent and preference management, but were customized and made to work that way. So I guess I'm not in a position to necessarily endorse any candidates in that way. Mm-hmm. But in terms of bringing in, I guess, AI for consent and managed preferences, so AI, in my opinion, I guess, is really great for marketing. If you have the consent or the preference to email, for example, and you're doing some A/B testing, I think it's absolutely reasonable, and we should be using AI to develop unique content, knowing what you know about certain personas and demographics, all under the overlying umbrella of the fact that you have their consent to start. Mm-hmm. So data modeling could be, is really helpful in this space as well, which is, I think, in a lot of ways a predecessor to AI, far more rigorous and a lot less fancy than using AI for something like this. But I guess from my experience and my preference, I guess, or my opinion, is AI shouldn't be used to gather preferences and consent, but could be used once you have those consent and preferences to create the business outputs you might want. So write the email, write the website content, write the texts, write the phone call scripts even that support the business mechanisms to be maybe a little bit more nuanced and specific based on the type of data we know about that person or that persona's identity. So, selecting images that make sense, colors that make sense, things of that nature. But I hope that answers the question. So if you have follow-ups,
if that didn't answer the question, just have follow-ups. There are also like two other questions that might be related to each other, but I think Ono, if I'm pronouncing right, Onoriod, maybe has missed like the beginning of the session. So what is consent management? Could you like give us a short intro again?
Sure. Yeah. So consent management is really the active, holistic, compliant approach to managing an individual's opt-ins. And that encompasses, the fact that we can email them, mail them, text them, call them, and then also cookies. In a lot of ways, I guess for some organizations, it can be very complicated. In other organizations, it can be very simple. If you're not doing any print marketing, then, snail mail tracking from a marketing perspective is probably not necessary, but you might still need to track whether or not you mail bills to people versus just deliver them email bills. So really consent management is kind of the approach an organization takes. But because of the nature of, laws changing, laws being different, state to state in the US, country to country around the world, it's can get pretty nuanced pretty quick. So hopefully that was a good high level catch up.
Yeah. And there's also, I think it's the last question. I think the emphasis is like, want to learn more about the right consent management. Yeah, what do you think about that?
The right consent management?
Yeah, I maybe he could like describe more like in the description, like in the chat, and then at the end of the session we get back to it again.
Yeah. I guess just to, maybe expound on it a little bit, the right consent management tool for one organization is not going to be the right consent management tool for another. Even the approach one organization to the next is not the same. If you're, a really small nonprofit, maybe you're managing permissions in a spreadsheet, or you have Constant Contact or another email marketing provider that manages your opt-outs for you. I have an organization that I volunteer for that has 20,000 people that they manage in their email platform, because all they do is email. They don't call, they don't text, they don't snail mail. So they're hyper focused on email. And so their solution is very specific to just email. So depending on what your organization needs from a business or marketing perspective can really change what's right, if that makes sense.
Okay. If I'm wrong, please correct me, but I think it depends like on a lot of factors, like the size of organization, which country you are working on, maybe also the market or industry that you're active, and also like the type of communications that you might have with the customers and everything, right?
Type of communications is definitely a huge factor. And then, if location is almost the first one, but the type of marketing is a close second, only because, I've worked with organizations, for example, that in depending on the vendor, they really want to stay even hyper local. They want to find vendors that are in their time zone even, which can be pretty tough, or their country or their region, that sort of thing. That can, depending on your organization, how you feel about it or how your stakeholders feel about it, will help shorten that list. So.
Okay, great. We don't have any more questions, so maybe we could continue. And like, if there is questions, just put it in the chat. And at the end of the session, we will have again like a couple of minutes for answering the other questions. Okay, awesome. Continue. Okay. Yep. Thanks.
Awesome. Sure. So I have 3 use cases here, just to kind of help illustrate some maybe more business facing needs or reasons why consent management is helpful. So the first one I want to go through is alerts. So this really comes, conceptually, alerts can come in really a lot of shapes and forms. If you have a smartphone, you're Notifications, I mean, you're already getting them all the time from apps, email digests, things like that. Over time, I think I've turned off more and more pop-ups and notifications from different apps. But the fact that I can do that and change those customizations on an app basis, that's consent management. When I first got an iPhone like 15 years ago, I was okay with getting, notifications every 10 seconds because it was so new and it was shiny and it was lovely. But little by little, my needs have changed, my interests have changed, and I turned those off. So I wanted to be getting those alerts, and from, even something as my email, keep it real simple. Used to get the pop-ups, even the chime every single time I got an email, but little by little, as I was getting more emails, I decided that was not healthy or worthwhile to keep doing that. So I turned it off. So that is consent management in and of itself. So you're already doing it today. You didn't even know it. From a professional perspective, employers can send alerts via call or text based on their team's preferences for things like building closures, production issues. So if you're on a production team and a pipeline goes down, or a system goes down or something like that, and you're on an escalation path to get notified when something like that happens, that's preferences. You told them your mobile number, you told them what your if you have a landline still, you provided your contact information and acknowledge that you might be called when things like that happen. So when another a healthcare example here for you guys is hospitals send staff alerts when beds are full. Whether that's walkie-talkie alert or a pop-up on a laptop with procedure reminders, where to place overflow patients when supplies are low, or when radiology, for example, has a broken a backup of patients because the machine's down. So all of those are alerts in different ways that you consented to getting, whether it's by nature of your job or nature of your role, or you explicitly opted in or out because it's your personal device. These consents can get nuanced once you blend in those marketing personas that we've been talking about, but it is manageable with planning and scalable technology. And I guess open communication and transparency might actually be the biggest factor here. Partnering with your teams, partnering with those stakeholders proactively might actually be the biggest win if you can break those silos down. So, for example, another example here with alerts and notifications. So, a parent who teaches at the same school their child attends. When we think about personas, should they get the same message twice if school's closed? One as a parent and one as a teacher, same mobile device. Should they get the same message? Should they get different messages? One as a staff member, one as a parent? Or does one persona outrank the other? Because there's parent and staff, should they just get the staff message? What makes for a better user experience? What builds the trust? What makes sense from a data perspective? And if you consider a doctor's office where a nurse works, but also has an upcoming appointment scheduled, should their messages and reminders for that upcoming appointment be different or tailored because they're also an employee? Or should their experience match the standard patient experience? So outages and latencies happen. I mean, as systems and processes go down, it's inevitable. But the ability to alert appropriate team members through the means and methods that they want is going to be the best way to not only get those things up and running, but adhere to consent and preference management. Our next one here is customer journeys. So we build upon the notifications a little bit, and as those notifications and communications are strung together, that's a journey, regardless of the persona. It's always a journey. So these are for sales organization. Customer journeys are really the lifeblood of marketing efforts and earning revenue. All of the physical and virtual touches, snail mail, emails, texting, calls, all of that puts all of those points in a conversation blend together as really a stream of conversation to build brand awareness, begin or continue the conversation, prompt a sale, refer a friend. From a data perspective, managing that contact record, that single identity with or without any limited personas can leave a brand wanting. David Sims, the current Orange Theory CMO, used to work at GNC. And in a recent marketer study issue, he shared that through data, GNC realized that the the 2 personas they had in their loyalty program weren't enough. They needed 7. They needed 7 personas with 7 points of relevance to make their expectations come to reality. So points of relevance isn't something we've talked about earlier in the chat here, but these are really those data elements from, first, second, or third party data. So these are your preferences and the fact that someone's opted into email, but they're also propensities to do or not do something, the number of orders, loyalty program points, first time customer indicators, or even if they used a coupon code. Anything that's going to help separate them from your larger customer list, basically. But GNC realized they needed 7 and 7 points or degrees of, 7 data elements to really separate all of their customer base into little smaller bubbles. And that's how they did their marketing. So every journey is an opportunity to connect, but also disconnect. So opt-outs in the US have to be included in every email, for example. And even if the opt-outs cut the conversation seemingly short, we have to honor those customer preferences because that's the frictionless experience that we have to keep top of mind to honor the brand value. And our last use case that we have here is website traffic. So we built the marketing's data-driven journeys. We've gone through, what is hopefully the most cost-effective, compliant means of communicating with your customers. They get the message and they visit your website. So this is one more opportunity to build that relationship. You have the data, you know them, and you know your organization. So now we have to connect the dots. We're going to use the data that we have. Hopefully we've collected something prior. We're going to assume they're not anonymous for a minute, but we're going to use the data we have and then collect the data we don't. So this is that cookie pop-up at the bottom. Hopefully they've accepted at least part or in whole. And we're going to connect. We're going to leverage all of this in website traffic into custom landing pages. So there's a whole nother slew of platforms that we could dive into. Maybe I'll come back for another Zero to Hero on journeys, but this is really where we can really connect the data that we've collected from a customer consent preference management with those marketing personas into tangible, legitimate sales opportunities for the business. So we know what the content the consumer wants. And so we're going to show them through those custom landing pages. And for brand new customers, those anonymous users, they'll get content, or they should get content that just aligns to the sales goals. Nothing generic, nothing kind of boring and ho-hum. Don't drop them on your main regular website. But we need to intentionally select hero images, calls to action, and color, like I mentioned earlier, that are going to play an important role in that engagement. So part of this learning loop that I have illustrated here, we've built it. We're going to measure it, learn it, and demonstrate it. This is really, learning loop is super cheesy, but this is what we're already doing. If you're familiar with product development or you're, a member of a Scrum team, this concept is really nothing new. But from a permission and consent management perspective, you'll notice that with your opt-ins and opt-outs being really the top line filter that you should ever have in this, it can get pretty cumbersome pretty quickly. But at the same time, measuring those key KPIs as you go, and watching the traffic evolve and get more sophisticated, and you'll see people do the things you want and need them to do, is the main goal. That's really the pie in the sky goal, right? So by measuring along the way, we're going to really understand what small changes are being made that are doing us service and doing us a disservice. So in a perfect world, you're measuring your KPIs before you make any changes. So before you embark on, instituting a new platform or making any significant sweeping changes, you're going to need to identify and lock in not only what those KPIs are and get to a common ground definition with your business teams, but also pull queries and measure them before you start making changes. And then along the way, have a very watchful eye on those in conjunction with your business teams. If they're doing A/B testing on their side with ads or landing pages or email marketing, want to keep a very close watchful eye on also what's happening on the website and have that learning that learning opportunity between both teams. And that demonstration and like open communication and transparency is going to be really important as well to just keep that learning loop going. So the I guess, important part here is that not only is consent and preference management your top line filter when you're getting to the nuances of all of this, but at the same time, being comfortable and I guess being transparent with your business teams on what those goals are, where you're trying to get, where you are now, is going to be really, really important. So talk about what's working and what's not working, and why, and I guess starting at the beginning of the process and starting with instituting or bringing in a new vendor, you hopefully by this point where you're actually building landing pages and getting things up and running, you've established really good working relationships with those stakeholders. So hopefully by this point in the process, when the vendor is up and running and you're actually talking about A/B testing and instituting, nuanced changes and things, you can legitimately have a good, open, transparent conversation to really learn from each other and get that feedback and ideas along the way. So at a really high level, this is what we've covered, and we'll kind of roll back into Q&A for the time that we have left, if there's any new questions that have popped up.
So far, we don't have any new questions. I think but the guys have like a couple of minutes still time if they will have any questions.
Yeah.
Just pop it up. And thank you for again for your presentation. It was I think all the points you mentioned are really important for like organizations if they don't want if they want like to adhere to the rules and like being working properly under the consent management umbrella. Okay, we always have this tradition kind of that you need to choose the best question so far. And then we are giving them like a voucher for their Microsoft exam. So which question have you choose between the 2 or 3 that was asked?
The AI question was great. I guess it's not something that I had kind of folded into the presentation today, but it's a big part of, what I know is top of mind for everybody. So I would say that was the best question we got here today.
Okay, great. Then we will contact Said, and we will give him the voucher, and congratulations. Okay, then let me and I think this is like the QR code the guys could scan and being connected, and if they have probably further questions they could ask you on social medias, probably LinkedIn.
Yeah, absolutely. Welcome to reach out to me on LinkedIn, and if there's any other questions that you guys want to ask, I'm happy to oblige. Okay,
great. Then any last words in the presentation?
No, I just appreciate the opportunity to join everybody this afternoon, and of course. Thanks.
Yep. Thanks everyone for joining us. Enjoy coding, and davet